Welcome to our webinar, Mars and Venus in the Workplace. My name is Steve Porcaro, and we're going to just start with our quick overview of what we're going to go through today. We're going to quick housekeeping, show people how to use GoToWebinar if they're not familiar with it. I'll do a quick introduction. Some of you I've met online, others I may not have had the opportunity yet. We're going to have the presentation, and if there's time and if people can stay, we'll be taking some questions and answers and have a little chat. But the big thing here is I'd like everyone to leave with at least one idea that you'll use going forward in your day-to-day professional or personal life. And that's really, if I'm doing my job fairly well, then I know I've been successful. All right, so quick intro. Again, my name is Steve Porcaro. I'm the president of One for All Coaching. I have a small coaching consulting business. My signature program is called Sales Plus. I do executive, business, and team coaching. I work primarily with medical device sales professionals, and I do a fair amount of workshop training and mastermind groups. I happen to run some LinkedIn medical device sales groups that I happened to be online on LinkedIn many years ago, and there really wasn't a place for medical device sales professionals to come and network and share relevant industry information, so I started the groups. In my experience in a nutshell, and again, I just want to take a minute, I started out as a Navy corpsman working in the operating room as a surgical technologist. We were able to first assist. I managed to work in the surgery clinic, the orthopedic clinic, central supply. So I have a good 5-year solid background working in the operating room. I got recruited by a small orthopedic trauma company called Synthes, and I spent 12.5 years selling orthopedic trauma. I moved over to sports medicine with a company in Florida, Arthrex, selling sports medicine. I started doing independent 1099 contracting with total joints, hips, knees, shoulders. I did field training, and at the end of the day, I had a small distributorship with some specialty products. So I've had a variety of roles focused in the medical device background, and it was a perfect foundation for what I do now for the last 11 years, coaching and consulting, training, and working with business owners and sales professionals. But that brings us to our topic for today, and I really want to make sure we spend time because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, is communication. And more importantly, how do we communicate as professionals on a day-to-day level? Mars and Venus, the concept has been out there for a while. Joel Gray wrote a book, Mars and Venus Communication, and then he wrote a couple other books. And this particular approach is taking the Mars-Venus concept, men and women, and using it in the workplace. And when we talk about improving our communication and relationship skills, as professionals, we do this daily. We do it at home, we do it in our community, and we do it in the workplace. And one of the things that's been happening is misunderstandings, very common. I would say 90% of communication, we have so many obstacles with technology. We think our communications with email, text, phone messages are clear. The truth is, I think it just adds more obstacles. The other thing, when we talk about men are from Mars and women are from Venus, it really goes to communication styles. And that's a 50,000-foot overview. And we're talking about generalities because when you start looking at this information, you'll notice that there are some people who can go on either side. You may have a man that has certain attributes and communication style, and you may have a woman that has another. So this is a 50,000 foot view. It's part of the overall communication strategy that we incorporate on a day-to-day basis. And the other thing I want you to think about, this is non-judgmental. It's just an observation by this author, and that we see some of these things in our day-to-day life. One of the reasons why we're addressing this and why I'm sharing this information with you is because misunderstanding and miscommunication between people in general can be frustrating, but I also know it causes a lot of confusion, conflict, and sometimes frustration in organizations. And I know working in the operating room, you have both sexes in there. I also know, and again, we're on the phone call here. Everything happens in Vegas, stays in Vegas, right? I can be confidential with you. I've been sleeping in the same bed with my wife for almost 30 years. We've been married 25, but we've been together for a long time, and I can tell you it's an ongoing skill development. I'd like to think over time I've gotten better, but like any other communication is a skill that we need to practice. So that's why I'm sharing it with you, and I'd love to get some feedback and hopefully share some good tips that we can use going forward. So why are we here? The big scheme of things, very simply, men and women have different communication styles. And again, I'm just going to lay this out, predominantly a 50,000 foot view. There are people, men and women, who communicate that are closer in alignment based on their background. So when we talk about men and women, we're talking about the general communication style. I do a lot with communications, and for those of you who use assessment tools, behavioral tools in your job, and your company may use them, a lot of the reasons why we communicate the way we do is we're hardwired by nature. We also have input nurture, the way we're raised. In our society, in the U.S., we have a certain culture that in some way dictates the way we learn to communicate. We don't have enough time to go into that whole thing, but at the end of the day, this is just a communication style. The other thing that we run into is rules and values that may not be understood clearly by the other side. My wife has 3 sisters and 1 brother. So the interesting part is, growing up, her older brother joined the military when he was 18, and she was a young girl, I think 8 or 9 when he left. So she grew up in a household with her mother and father, so there were 4 women and 1 man. So in her household, they communicated because they had 4 women in their house. In my house currently, I have 3 boys and my wife. So my boys communicate by wrestling and calling each other, all the worst things that brothers do to each other. And when they started doing that, she said, wow, I didn't realize boys communicated like that. So it's very interesting on the different rules and style. And if you have siblings or you have children, you can appreciate some of this. But this goes back to the root of what we're running into, is that we communicate in the way we were raised, and maybe the way we've been trained or the way we've been educated. And sometimes we need to see the other side and how they communicate. And this is really, I think, again, an ongoing process. If you think about some of the assumptions and misunderstandings that happen, even with people of the same sex, people in our own families, people who know us well, and then you magnify that by the number of people you run into on a common everyday basis in the grocery store, at work. I remember going into hospitals, and I would stop into central supply, I would stop into purchasing, I would stop in the nursing's office, the physician's office, the OR, and the large ORs that had 20 rooms, you're going to see people all over the place. So adapting our communication styles and being clearly understood and communicating clearly is essential. So we're going to take some time to talk about some tips, what's going to work and what doesn't work. But let's just start with the big challenge. What are some of the biggest challenges that we run into when it comes to men and women? And again, overall, it's really, sometimes it's not what we say, it's what people hear. Sometimes we don't have to say anything, it's what they see. That's this whole nonverbal communication concept. In the operating room, it's very interesting. For those of you who work in the operating room, I know everyone on the call doesn't, but we would go into an operating room and we would put a mask on our face. And for some of these big cases, we would, the surgical team would put on a whole headgear, and they would kind of put on this whole system for total joints, or sometimes for their spine cases. So these were obstacles to communication. But at the end of the day, how we handle these disagreements or these differences will really impact how effective we are in communication. Going into a doctor's office when he's busy seeing patients, trying to see someone at the end of the day when they're trying to get out, or follow up with your manager, or if you're a manager or a business owner and you're trying to communicate properly with your team, all this comes into play. So when we look at men and women, or Mars versus Venus, as I like to put it for our discussion, we have to start with this basic assumption that there are differences, and we need to see the other person's point of view or the other style. And one of the things that I'm going to share with you, this is not just for women. There are people who come from other countries that have differences in communication. I've worked with clients internationally. I've worked with people where English is a second language, or you may work with somebody that have age difference, generational differences, and we have to adapt our communication style to communicate with them as well. So when we're talking about gender, it's only one of the factors that we look at. But for our conversation today, since I would say as a professional we run into this more than ever, we have to make sure that we're validating that there is a difference. As much as we all think we're on the same page, sometimes we're not. So one of the easiest ways to do this is, and I've done this with my wife, and I'm using my wife as an example because she's not here, but she gave me permission to use her as an example, is that when we got married and we started living together, we didn't have a set of guidelines or rules. And especially if you're moving in with someone, teamwork, right? Who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to shop? Who's going to clean the bathroom? You know, all the glamorous jobs. And if we're having a discussion and we don't come to an agreement, how do we handle our disagreements? How do we work together as a team? So even though we were in love, we still had to figure out how to work together. Now, the funny part is, this is somebody that I plan on spending the rest of my life with. If you think about it in a workplace setting, this is somebody you may work with them on a regular basis, or you may provide a service to somebody. You need to figure out how to get along with them and communicate effectively. And it does take some time. So the rules, the guidelines, the procedure, these are general 50,000-foot rules and tips that I'm going to share with you. So one of the things that I'm trying to simplify this very easily, right? Big blunders. And this is based on my personal experience, but also from the book. When I looked at what some of the common challenges, number one, as a man, we always try to fix things and provide solutions. And I stepped back, and my wife mentioned it to me one day. She said, "You're always trying to provide solutions." And I said, "Well, honey, that's what I do when I go to scouting, when I was in the operating room, when I was selling orthopedic equipment. My job was to provide solutions, plans D, E, and F for the physician, for the surgical team. It's something that for most men, we fall into that role because that's the way we were raised. It's not right or wrong. It's just the way it is at the moment. And it takes a long time for men to stop doing that. And to tell you the truth, it's taken me 30 years of being with my wife to ease off a little bit. Not all the way, but a lot of the way. For women, one of the things that they do is offer unsolicited advice. And again, it's not a judgmental thing. It's just an observation. And this is how women communicate for the most part. And I'll know my wife will do this at times, and I'll bring it to her attention, and we'll laugh about it, because at this point, I try to put into practice a lot of these things that I share with other people. And I'm struggling with this on a daily basis. It's easy to fall back to our default mode. But when we look at these two common issues, it really sets the stage for what we're trying to do. So let's look at the Martian characteristics. In general, one of the things when you look at a Martian, and for the most part these are men, but there are some women who fall into this category as well, our identity and self-esteem is primarily based on accomplishing tasks. It's what I do. For most men, and historically I would say in the last 50, 60, 75 years, the men, our fathers, our grandfathers, they identified as with what they did for a living or what they did in the community. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm an accountant, I'm a plumber, I'm an engineer, and the list can go on. And that was pretty common, and that's how we identified. The other thing is achievements. Every time we accomplish something, score a touchdown, put a nail in the wall, climb a mountain, put out a fire, save a life. We become those knights in shining armor that come in and save the day. To us, it was getting that gold star on the head. It made us feel important, but it also proved that I was competent. All this led to us having pride in our ability to solve problems. And this is funny because for me, I would go in my room and I would try to solve everything on my own because it was a mental challenge. I always liked challenges and I hated to lose. And when I read this information and I looked at the book and I'm reading all this, I could see myself in there on a regular basis. The other characteristics, and I've been accused of this a lot, we make a point and we use communication to solve problems and convey content, right? Very briefly, my emails, sometimes I'll text my wife, one-word answers. I'm sharing information. My whole message is just to share information. It's only when I'm in a position where I need to add more input and add more depth and bench strength in a sense. But for the most point, you talk about some men, they call them, they don't speak unless they're spoken to. And sometimes when they're in a group, they talk about the strong and silent type. For some men, for many years, that was the way they came across. So again, depending on your role, I have friends who are police officers. I spent time in the military. Power, efficiency, action, just the bottom line. These were men who said what they mean and mean what they said. And there was a place for them. And society said, hey, those were the strong, silent type. Again, this was the general consensus. I have 3 boys, and the funny thing is, modesty is not a virtue, not only on Mars, but in my house. And I think this could be a sign of the times. My boys think they're all good looking, they're all strong, they're all smart, they want to be the best at everything you do. We're raising our children to be successful and confident. But I know I have nieces that are the same way when it comes to modesty. So there are some overlaps on this as you start looking at it. And as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Fix-It. At the end of the day, I take care of most of the repairs in the house. My wife takes care of other things that she has skills in, but I worked with my father over the years and he taught me how to use tools, so I become Mr. Fix-It. There are times when I want my wife to become Mr. Fix-It or Mrs. Fix-It, but really not what she does. There's a few more here. Is for some men, we talk about exclusivity. They want to be the best that they can in their certain arena. So you'll see people who say, hey, I'm the best, growing up. I'm the best football player on this side of the street, or I'm the fastest in my neighborhood or on my team. It's something that we were raised a certain way to do that. So again, I can relate to some of these distractions, being on the move. These are general characteristics, but we want to focus on one thing and do it well. For some people, that's the secret to success. And then the last thing is how do we look at some of these things here and wrap it all together? A lot of men have a man cave. Now, they may not have an actual man cave, but they may go to a place that they use as a cave. Some people will go to the local pub. Some people will go to a club, a bar, anywhere where there's people where they can let down and be themselves. Some people actually have a cave, i.e., family room, garage, shed. People go different places to relax. So let's talk a little bit about Venusian characteristics. And again, 50,000 foot view. Very simply, most Venusians identify and self-esteem is based on quality of relationships. Most women are in a relationship in their family where they're not the primary, but the nurturing caregiver, or they may be the caregiver in the house. Even though you have spouses, for some women, it's based on sharing and based on their relationships. And this goes back to the way they were raised. The next thing is when they want to feel better, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, talking and sharing that information is a way for them to use it as a pressure relief valve. So they'll talk about that. And mutual support and sharing of the culture, in a sense, they'll get together with like-minded individuals. They have clubs and they have groups that they'll go to, and they'll feel comfortable in that group sharing stories, but also sharing experiences. Again, there's some commonality with men, and women are going to share that commonality as well with other women. A couple other things that they do that you'll see: multitask. Again, today, excuse me, women may be the primary caregiver in the home. They may be setting social calendars. They may be packing lunches for schools. They may be doing multiple things because they're engaged on many levels. And in a workplace setting, their basic nature is to improve things. Again, maybe it's home. My wife, she's out buying curtains. She's looking at paint colors. I happen to be colorblind, so when she asks me, I'll say, honey, whatever you like is fine with me as long as we have something covering the windows. The other thing is when it comes to offices, in some of the large offices, you may have some women who are putting together the social functions or putting together some of the other business committees in the group. And this is just based on their interaction and the way they collaborate in large groups. Excuse me. Another characteristic, communicating is a way for Venusians mostly to solve problems and express feelings, as we've talked about, reduce stress and feel better, give and receive emotional bonds. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Connecting with individuals on an emotional level is reassuring that they're not the only ones going through it, but you also gain support, you gain enthusiasm through that as well. Stimulates creativity, discovers new ideas, and creates emotional bonds. Again, this is on a general setting for most Venusians or women. So one of the things we're going to do is talk about some tips when it comes to problem solving, because I think once you understand the lay of the land, we have to get to the root and say, hey, when people are problem solving, how do they address it? And the easiest way to do this is, hey, let's take a look at a Martian and say, what are his general approaches to problem solving? Number one, most Martians only talk about it if they have a solution. And again, they may not share it in open with general discussion, but in a workplace setting, if you have a problem, you want to have a solution that goes with it. Because if you can't address it, I'm going to put it on the back burner. Sometimes, and this goes back to brevity and being brief, hey, someone sends me an email or a text, do you have time for a meeting today? The quick response is no. Do you need much more than that? If you need an explanation, I can give you one, but you didn't ask for it. So my default approach is to use the least number of words. Over time, my wife, she used to get offended because I wouldn't expand on my answers. And I said, well, honey, when I try to expand, I wasn't really sure of what you were looking for, so I just kept it short and sweet. And again, it's more of a style thing than anything. And she finally understands me, I hope, after all these years. For Venusians, when there's a problem, they want to talk about it. And if you cannot understand it until you hear it all. So even though somebody may share what the problem is, they want to make sure that they shared all the details, the nuances, and then after understanding and hearing it, you can understand it fully, and it may help with the problem. The other thing is, the more details, the experiences, you can develop that rapport because you share that commonality, and it strengthens the relationship and overall may reduce strength. Reduce stress. Strength. I don't think it reduces strength, but it does reduce stress. So there are going to be times when you may not be able to do some of these things when you're problem solving, and that's where the frustration and the communication comes in. How do we address that? So let's talk about feelings and emotions. Again, these are tips and giving you some ideas what people are going through. So when it comes to feelings and emotions, a Martian sometimes showing feelings is a sign of weakness, and people may use it against you. It may not even be enemies. Again, as I mentioned, in my house, my sons are ruthless with each other, and they'll use anything against each other, but I think that's tough brotherly love. Other things Martians will do, they want to have some privacy when they're processing certain information. Not everything is open for discussion. Again, that strong silent type, they'll go off, and you'll see people in movies really portraying this, going off in private and handling it. May not be the best way, but that's what they did. And as much as we say business is business and it's not personal, a lot of men will leave their business in the office, and then they'll get in an argument with somebody, but if it's business related, they can go play golf, or they can go out, play basketball or shooting or whatever they do with people they had a discussion, especially when it's business related, because they left it in the office. And then when it comes to other feelings and emotions, right? Sometimes all you want to do is win. There has to be a winner, there has to be a loser, and this is part of that. Hey, I'm on top of the heap, and this is how I show my dominance, is by winning. Or I have to win. That means you're a loser, or you lost the race, and I'm feeling better about the situation. For Venusians, slightly different. They share feelings, especially vulnerable feelings, that build trust and get support. And what happens is, if you think about people in your life or people you know in a workplace setting, how this will affect things. If you're struggling with a project or you're struggling to close a deal, how do you know how to help somebody? And sometimes there is a little bit of feeling that gets wrapped into that. The other thing that most Venusians will do is share their innermost feelings, and sometimes doing that shows that you feel comfortable enough, and it goes back to esteem and confidence, that you're comfortable showing your vulnerable side. And you know, and I straddle this line. I know at some point I had to ask for help on many things when I started my business, when I was out in the field, being a father, being a husband. And when I started asking for help, it made me realize and know my limitations on a personal level. So again, this is just the way people communicate. And the other thing in general is Venusians want everyone to win, and they want to create a win-win solution. So if you look at the way people are dealing with emotions here, this will help you develop a strategy to accept this and how to leverage that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So when it comes to receiving support, you know, I struggled as a man for many years. I struggled, you know, ego is a big thing. Only ask for help if you really need it. Well, again, if you've been in healthcare for a while, the big joke is most men will only go to the doctors when their limb is ready to fall off or they're on their deathbed. So you'll see people being their own worst enemies. And, you know, at what point, when do you really need help? Well, I don't know. That's the deciding factor. But a lot of Martians will only ask for help when they need it. And unfortunately, our society, and it could be generational, it could be the sign of the times, we're judged on by what you can do on your own, this whole independence and being self-sufficient. It's a curse and a blessing, right? We raise our kids to be independent and self-sufficient, almost to the point where, as a parent, they don't need us anymore. Well, if you're in a work situation, you want your employees and your team members to be independent and self-sufficient, but they also need to ask for help when they need it, or else it may impact the company and the bottom line. Sometimes Martians will take the approach, the ends justifies the means. I'm going to do whatever it takes to close the business deal, to get that new account, to bring that new business on board. Sometimes bending the rules is part of the plan. Not for everybody, but sometimes it happens. And then at the end, success is measured by the end results and not the process. And I'm guilty on all counts. I look at this and say, yeah, I've done this. And at the same time, once I started being aware of that, and I shared that information with my wife, she was able to understand that this is a communication style. For Venusians, slightly different. Offers unsolicited help generates greater cooperation. And part of it is, if you wait to ask for help, you're only going to get help when you ask. But with Venusians, they're out there and they're giving freely of themselves, and they're helping others around them on an ongoing basis. And that provides the support and the cooperation within an organization. The next thing, success is a journey and not a destination. So depending on your philosophy, your style, your values, most Venusians see success as an ongoing process. They're not interested in those quick, I'm going to get a touchdown and win the game today. I want to win the game, ongoing for the next month or for the rest of my work year. So it's slightly different approach. And then I think this is very telling. It's not what you do, but how you do it. Or more importantly, as my wife reminded me many times, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And I think that's very important for us to recognize that some people, it's just as important to offer support in the appropriate way than it is to offer support and just say, yeah, I'll help you, but my body language is saying I don't mean it. So again, people are receiving support and accepting support in different ways. Martians and Venusians, different supports. And we're going to share some other tips, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. I think the views on winning are very telling, and we've covered many of them, but I think we can drill down a little bit. A Martian will take credit for what you do and let it be known. So Martians, when they do something well, they want to take credit for it, and they'll let you know, hey, I won the game, I hit the touchdown, I scored the touchdown, or I hit the home run that's scored. I closed the big account. Because again, it goes back to, we get accolades, and that makes us feel better, but it also shows how competent we are. We'll also use it to promote ourselves and to let other people promote. And again, it's very interesting. When I started this business, being part of a surgical team, being part of the sales team, we would go in there and provide support. It was never about us. It was helping the patient. Now, when you're in business and you'll see companies, recommendations, testimonials, references, it's a different perspective sometimes, being that star player, being out in the highlight and being that person who gets the accolades. Martians are looking for that. They want to be in that limelight. The other thing is very interesting when it comes to winning. Never do what you don't have to, right? We're very efficient in a sense in general. So you want to focus on the things that will bring you the most success and give your energy to the things that are going to give you the greatest return on investment. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then the last thing, if you do more, you want to make sure you're compensated. And this goes back to, and I think of my grandfather. My father-in-law was famous for this. He said, I only volunteered when I got paid, and it was a pretty funny joke, but I think it was a generational thing. People want to get paid for what they're worth, especially in a workplace setting. So let's look at Venusians and see how they approach winning. They have a different approach, giving credit to those who helped you. In general, they're part of the team, and you'll see people, Venusians, giving credit to their whole team and people who help them. They'll promote others, and they'll promote you. This is the way that when you look back, Venusians, when I say we, Venusians are connected on an emotional level, a collaboration, and a bond, slightly different than Martians. And more importantly, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As much as we'd like to say that, a lot of Venusians share that approach. And the last one, give more and you will get more. And that's a common strategy in a workplace setting, but also in nonprofit organizations, in the community, and a family setting. So again, you may look at this and say, yes, I can see both sides of this. This is to give you some insight to how other people are approaching certain situations, especially on winning. So one of the things I wanted to do as we start to wrap things up here, and again, we can talk about this forever, and then if I had time, I'd love to, but certain stress busters in the workplace. When things are getting stressful, Martians and Venusians are going to do certain things to relieve stress. Very simply, Martians need trust. They need to know that they're trusted. They need acceptance. They need appreciation. They need admiration. They need acknowledgement, and they need encouragement that they're on the right track. They're doing the right things. Stay the course. You'll overcome. You'll be able to persevere and overcome the challenge, close the business. This is what Martians need. The interesting thing is they may not tell you. That's why we're sharing this. But if you know somebody on a personal level and you see some of these things, it's usually we're not stroking their ego as much as we're helping them gain what they need when they're stressed out at work and they're stuck or they're paralyzed. For Venusians, they need other things. They need something slightly different. Caring, understanding, respect, inclusion, validation, and reassurance. Now, there are some commonalities, some similarities, but when you see a Venusian stressed at work, the first thing that is helpful is that caring approach. Being sympathetic and understanding is basically listening is a type of caring. Understanding the situation, what's going on, how can I help, reassuring them that you're going to be there, respecting that feeling and their situation is important, validating and including them into what's happening in the office in a workplace setting is very powerful. 9 times out of 10, when I work with clients and teamwork and organizations, it's usually because when situations are stressful, they don't get the support, Martian or Venusian, that they need to move on. And they have to figure out how to get it by themselves so they can move on to that next level. So let's share some tips on how to help, and then we'll take some questions if you can stay. So these are key tips when a Martian needs to communicate more effectively with Venusians. I'm starting with men. Unfortunately, the Martians, because sometimes they need more help on this. At least in my experience, it took a while. But one thing as a sales professional, as a business owner, as a manager, and this is true, I think for a lot of people, we need to take more time to listen in a respectful way. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we run into, is because time, everyone says time is money, and we have to multitask, and we have a huge list of accomplished tasks we have to accomplish. But taking the time to listen is probably one of the best things you can do when you're talking with a Venusian. The next thing is you want to validate comments and gestures. If you're listening to someone and you're looking them in the eye and you're shaking your head in agreement and you're leaning forward, shows that you're interested. Again, a lot of times we do this with clients. We'll do it with people that we know intimately, but taking the time to listen and validate and truly hear what they're saying takes hard work and practice. Usually, when we're saying hello and goodbye, are we making eye contact? Sometimes it's that initial eye contact, and it's that eye contact at the end of the conversation that shows that we're supportive, we're concerned on what they're thinking and feeling. That helps get our message across and let them know that as a Martian, we're understanding what a Venusian's saying. Here's the other thing that I've been guilty of in the past, and I strive very hard now, is to interrupt less and don't give solutions. We need to solve less and listen more. This is another great takeaway, that if there's one thing I think that would help Martians is this. It's taken me many years to stop that impulse, but I think the benefits have been there. And along with this, be less impulsive and have more patience. Again, easier said than done. It takes time, it takes energy and effort, but the more you practice some of these things from a Martian standpoint, the easier it is going to be when you're communicating with a Venusian. Couple more things I want to share. Ask more questions. By asking questions, you show that you want to understand it more in depth, the situation, feelings, emotion, thought processes. We need to soften the approach, the edges, so to speak. Again, as my wife reminded me, it's not what I say, it's how I say it. Focus on more on having a good relationship than getting the task done. Now, this is true for many. I can use this example not only in personal relationships, but in the community with across the board. Sometimes we're so focused on the task, we have to remember that the relationship, we have to develop the relationship. And when we develop the relationship and that improves, our task focus will improve as well, especially when we're developing teamwork and cooperation. We talk about the importance of little things. It's, again, in a workplace setting, what's a little thing? Birthdays, holding a door, maybe grabbing someone a cup of coffee. When we are thoughtful and we're showing that these people are important, the people we're communicating with, sometimes it's the little things. You might have heard this in the past. Sometimes you'll go and you'll see someone speak. You may not remember what they said during the presentation, but you'll remember how they made you feel. Inspired, motivated, insightful. Maybe it was inspirational and it brought a tear to your eye. Sometimes the little things do that for people, and we want to be able to do that. Now, when we talk about tips for Venusians on how to communicate effectively with Martians, I think this goes hand in hand. It takes practice, takes a little effort, and you want to make sure that over time, the goal here is progress, not perfection, and that goes for Martians as well as Venusians. Even if you only use a few of these tips going forward, you're going to see some of the benefits very quickly. The first one, stand up, speak out, take credit, and let them know that you have a solution. On a personal experience, sometimes my wife will share. My wife is a graphic designer. She's an illustrator, and there are times when I'm working with clients and I'll give her some of the projects to work on and I'll ask for feedback. But even though I've been sleeping in the same bed with her for many years, I still can't read her mind, and there's a certain level of assumption sometimes. So my wife, over the years, I've been telling her, this is good. She stands up and she's very clear. I have the answer or I don't. It takes time. And also, I know for some Venusians, it's hard because my wife and how do I say this? Her father grew up in a generation where the children were to be seen and not heard. So she grew up in a household like that. So now she's in a place where she needs to be heard, and she had to overcome that challenge. Another thing for Venusians, stay positive and avoid complaining or blaming. You want to minimize the negative feelings and not make excuses. And again, this is a non-judgmental, this is just an observation. Sometimes, as my wife would say, in a situation, she was so used to explaining why things were happening. All I wanted to know is, hey, did you finish this, or yes or no type of thing. The big joke in my house was I would ask my wife a question, and instead of telling me the time, she would tell me how to build a clock. She would get to the answer, but she would share a lot of information that was irrelevant. And we joked about it. Once we understood that these were communication styles and behaviors, and we were able to adapt, we were able to sharpen our sword and to be able to communicate more effectively, not only personally, but professionally. The next thing is be specific, brief, factual, and get to the point quickly. And again, there's a time and place, but sometimes in a workplace setting, you need to be this brief and specific. And there are times when you need to expand and expound on some of these ideas. But for the most part, when you're talking with Martians, this is the best way to go. Another one, don't offer unsolicited advice. Again, there are times when Martians may ask for advice when they finally realize they need help. But sometimes when, and I'm a perfect example, and I'll take credit for it, if my wife offers me advice, in my mind, I'm not competent. It's only after years of introspective reflection, my wife has advice and support, has no reflection on me. She just wanted to help solve the problem because she works in collaboration and cooperation mode. A few more tips that I think are very helpful. You need to respect a Martian's need for space. And the funny part is my wife has a cave. She doesn't call it a cave, she calls it a studio. You may not have a cave per se, but you may have space where you go and unwind and decompress. Everybody has some variation of this, but a lot of Martians need to go there and have that space. Another one, emotionally charged rhetorical questions. I think this is a societal habit or communication style that people have picked up. I think it's one of the things that we've grown accustomed to being asked, and people ask us as a man or a Martian for this case. But if you can minimize that, I think that would be helpful. And the other thing is, and again, easier said than done, don't take offense or charge personally to his actions and behavior. Sometimes in a workplace setting, Martians will do things and people think, especially Venusians, that they're doing it because of, or they're reacting to something that someone else did. And sometimes it's not. Most of the time it's not. It's based on their own personal code of conduct, their own approach, their own style. But it is hard sometimes, depending on the intimacy within the organization. If you're an outside salesperson and you don't interact with colleagues on a regular basis, some of these things are a non-issue. If you go into a workplace setting and you're all sharing an office, you may see more or less of certain behaviors. The other thing is very interesting when you talk about buffering message or your message with supportive comments. Sometimes Venusians will say, well, I'll throw a little compliment in there to kind of buffer that or add some support and advice, which in general is what people are looking for, right? They're looking for that encouragement. They're looking for that support, that admiration and acknowledgement. But we want to make sure that it comes clearly and distinctly on its own versus being added to another message. I think, and I can understand because I've seen both sides of this, that if a Martian has to figure out what you're saying and how many messages you're sending, sometimes it gets overly complicated because there's so many nuances in the messages. So these are just some high-level communication tips. A few more. I think as we wrap this up, I have a couple more slides and then we'll wrap it up. If you need support, if a Martian needs support and they ask for it, you want to make sure that it's appropriate, it's non-demanding, without attitude. It has to be brief and direct. And the correct wording, what do we mean by correct wording? Something along the line, hey, would you help me versus could you help me? Because when you say would, you're asking someone directly, I need your help. If you're asking could, sure, I could help you. Are you asking for help? There are opportunities for miscommunication. I think sometimes, and this goes back to understanding the person and understanding their behavior and communication style on an intimate level. I think timing is very important. If there's many things going on, when do you have somebody's undivided attention? Again, it goes back to workplace leadership. You know, if you're in a busy area, busy situation, when do you have time? And then a non-demanding attitude. Again, non-demanding is a relative term. People don't think they're demanding, but sometimes they may come across as demanding, or someone may read into this. So that's why being brief and direct allows you to go in there and say, hey, Steve, I need help with this project in 10 minutes, or I only need you for 10 minutes. Would you be able to help me? Nice and clear. I don't have to figure it out. And, you know, the funny part is, as a sales professional, we communicate, or a business owner or a manager, we communicate for a living. Our only goal is to help the customer connect the dots from what we offer to the value, and does it solve their solution without having them read between the lines. Sometimes we do that with our communication. So to really close us up for Venusians, if we focus on the bottom line, tempered with building relationships, we want to make sure that our message is clear to Martians, and we also want to minimize building that relationship when you're communicating in a workplace setting, because they really want to focus on, hey, let me take care of the problem, or let me help you, and then we can focus on the relationship, which is slightly different than what a Venusian's looking for. So because of time, I'm going to go right to the summary, and then if you can stay for a few minutes, and I'll definitely take some questions and love to hear from you. If you look at what the return on investment, the benefit of minimizing conflict and miscommunication, definitely increase teamwork, again, personally and professionally. You'll improve the communication in a sense that the message will come across, you'll be more effective, and it will be easier to communicate wants, need, help, desires, anything. It's really amazing when you start looking at the increased communication effectiveness. The cooperation, you won't have to twist people's arm to get help. I think one of the biggest things, especially in large organizations and teams, when their communication barriers are diminished, you're able to increase the cooperation among team members. And what that allows is really, we talk about an enjoyable workplace. People want to come to work on Monday, but it really hits the bottom line and helps the business grow. You see less turnover, and you see profits growing. And at the end of the day, whether it's commission or profits, it all comes back to, what can I do to minimize communication snafus and increase effectiveness? All right, so if we have time, if you can stay, we can take some questions. I'd love to open it up. You can unmute your phone, or you can type it in. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for staying with me. If you have to go, no problem. This is being recorded. We can send out the recording if you have to jump off. So what type of questions, thoughts, experiences, insights? I'd love to hear from people on the call. Anyone have a question? Anyone run into communication snafus at work now? All right, got a couple questions. Do you ever find that there could be a hybrid style between the two? Benita, that's an excellent question, and the answer is definitely yes. And I see that on a regular basis, especially with people who are in leadership roles that have to straddle both styles. As I mentioned, I was a pure Martian many years ago, and my wife mentioned to me, about 10 years ago when I started my business and I started coaching professionally that she goes, I like communicating with you better, and our relationship improved because I realized the importance of my communication style, especially when I was working in a coaching field. So I definitely see people, when you step back and look at your communication style, because you have to, you'll see a definite improvement. And I think because of our society today, there are people who come towards the middle all the time, Benita. Thank you. I would say that. I've seen it, and I know people. Thank you. Tim, thank you for your feedback. Glad you enjoyed it. Other questions or thoughts? Benita, let me just throw this in here. I look at this, and because of the work I do and because I worked in the operating room, half these traits for Venusians I have, half the traits for the Martians I have. But there are very few people, unless you're in a program or a role, that you have to have that style. All right, Tim asked a quick question about political correctness and how it relates to Mars and Venus. Also, there may be too much PC nowadays, in my opinion. All right, Tim, so that's an interesting concept. I use a behavioral assessment tool, a DISC assessment, with all my clients and all my teams that focuses on behavior and communication. And when we use the language, the neutral language of communication style, it really removes a lot of this political correctness because it's a generality that we're looking at. And yeah, it's easy to say Mars and Venus, but the truth is, to Benita's point, there are many people now, and I don't think it's because of political correctness. And again, I don't want to speak for Joel Gray, he's the expert, but I look at the generation issues, right? There are 5 generations in the workforce. And if you look back 50 years ago or 60 years ago, and I go back to my in-laws or my grandparents, you know, men were men and women were women, and it was pretty clear cut. And there were certain expectations in society. But over the last 25 years, the last 5 years, our communication styles, we had to evolve and adapt. And in some ways, we needed to. So yes, there are some things there, Tim, where there may be some political correctness issues, but I think it goes back to communication styles and behaviors, which, to Benita's point, may not be men and women. I think it's individuals. That's why I try to use the terms Martian and Venusian versus men and women, because there are times when I feel like a Venusian and there are times when I feel like a Martian, and I think a lot of people may feel that way. Other questions, thoughts? Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I can only share my experiences and what I've been doing, but yeah, it's a great topic. I tell you, there are times when communication to me is the crux of all the problems in the world when it comes to business and some of the issues within organizations. Effective communication is critical, whether it's at home, whether it's in the workplace. The issues are the same. Anyone else have a question or a thought, feedback they'd like to share before we wrap it up? Oh. Yep, Benita. Yeah, we can definitely spend all day talking about that. All right. If that's it, we'll wrap it up. Thank you again for being on the call. I'll be having another webinar coming up in the next few weeks. I hope you can make it. If I can be of any assistance, please drop me a line. But have a great day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You're welcome, Benita. Have a great day.